And in North America, while we're saying, oh, we need hope, people around the world are dying in floods and dying from famines and drought and not enough water and heat waves. So my caution, in this whole discussion is that hope all by itself is just as bad as hopelessness, unless it's what drives us to take action. So I always say hope, schmope. Action is our only hope.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Climate Emergency Forum. Weaponized hopelessness. It's another tool. It's another tactic in the fossil fuel industry and the climate deniers toolbook. So once again, my name is Regina, and I'm your host for today. A fair warning. Abandon hope, all ye who enter. Definitely not. I'm not going to sell that idea here. In the words of someone who I greatly admire, and that is Noam Chomsky, we cannot afford hopelessness. We don't have the luxury to afford hopelessness. I remember many years ago when I started on this climate investigation, there was this idea, of course, back in the 90s, it's not true. Human beings can't affect the weather. Of course, they interchange weather for climate. Human beings can't do that. People who believe in climate change or global warming are negative, all kinds of things. That's changed. Now, with all that has happened, it's really almost impossible for people to not look around and say, gee, something's a little different from when I grew up. The summers seem longer or hotter. Now there's kind of this general recognition that, yeah, maybe something is going on. But what has happened is now the climate deniers are saying, oh, well, the weather's always changing. It always has, it always will. Look back at the Pliocene or some such. And then an adjunct to that is there's nothing we can do about it anyway. I would say that things have shifted to the very beginning, only God can control the weather, to there's nothing that we can do. I think that this plays very well into the hands of fossil fuel interests, big plastic, anything and everything that has to do with fossil fuel, anything and everything that has to do with stopping legislation that will do something to help us with climate change. And I'll be honest with you, and I've done this in the past. There have been times when I have felt hopeless. It's not a good place to be, and it's easy to find oneself there. But the tragedy of hopelessness is it helps to conceal or obscure options, ideas, creativity. What is it that we can do in the midst of this disaster? And I'm just going to name for you, I'm going to enumerate a few things, a few highlights from 2022. One was the Tonga volcano eruption that set off this global tsunami. Another was the rivers that hit record level lows all over the world. The health of the rivers is so important. What about the summer of flooding last year in Yellowstone Park and in many other places? There was, in 2022, one of the hottest heat waves in Europe that has been on recent record. And the West, the United States West, water crisis that continues apace. And we cannot forget the monsoons that led to catastrophic flooding in Pakistan, which emits 1% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, suffering this tremendous plight. If you are someone who is aware of what's going on, it's really easy to get hopeless and say, forget it. I can't do anything. Since I can't do anything, why bother doing anything? The thing is, it's important that we do all that we can. Now, I have a friend, and we've had many discussions about this, and it all kind of devolves into what's the point? What can I as an individual do? And I like to give the metaphor of a dying grandmother. We know that grandma's going to die. We know it's inevitable. Do we just throw up our hands and say, well, I'm going to go out to dinner. I'm going to go take a drive with some friends. I'm going to go have a few beers. It's going to happen anyway. No, we do our best to make the situation better, to ameliorate suffering, to improve the situation if we can, knowing all the while what is in front of us. And that is what's required of us today. Do not buy in to this canard of hopeless helplessness. I want to turn it over to our special guest today. We're very excited to have her with us, Julie Johnston.
Thank you, Regina. And it's kind of nice to be here. It's an interesting topic. You almost had me in tears there talking about our dying grandmother, because in a sense, that's what it's all about. And there are people going, yeah, Granny's going to die anyway, and going out for a beer. Something that I want to talk about is that there was research years ago, neurobiological research, that said the brain turns off when people cannot anticipate a positive future. And so some might read that and go, oh, well, it's all about hope. And I read that and I go, it's all about action, because what is it that gives us this sense of a positive future? What is it? Like, people always say, oh, if we don't have hope, we'll shut down. If we don't have hope, we'll become apathetic. It's not hope that we need. It is action that we need to take. And so it's not just hopelessness that's been weaponized. It is hope that has been, maybe weaponized isn't the right word, but I think it was Derek Jensen talked about hopium. And in North America, while we're saying, oh, we need hope, people around the world are dying in floods and dying from famines and drought and not enough water and heat waves. So my caution, in this whole discussion is that hope all by itself is just as bad as hopelessness, unless it's what drives us to take action. So I always say hope, schmope. Action is our only hope. We often say the only antidote to the despair that comes, or the feeling of hopelessness that comes, is taking action. So I think we really have to remember that it's not hope that has led to more action. That it's not hope that leads to action, it's action that leads to hope. Okay, so if we take action, then we can, for a little while at least, we can feel really good about things. And when you talked about our grandmother dying, something I talk a lot about with my sweetheart, my beloved, is that when we're feeling like there's no hope, when there's nothing left to be done, when the deniers and the fossil fuel corporations and the big investment banks are winning, we have to keep doing whatever we can do for the sake of all the children in the world, because they deserve to know that some of us kept at it despite all the evidence that we're doomed, right? And then what's happening right now is this push against doomerism. It's being called doomerism. My sense there is, like, some people say, well, that's just giving up. And to me, it's more like, well, maybe doomerism is actually grasping how incredibly horrifying this emergency is, how urgently the action is needed. So the doomerism is really, if we don't sort of fight again, like keep taking action. I don't know, am I making sense? I hope I am. I think that we have to be able to hold the two truths at once. Like, deniers have won, fossil fuel corporations have won. We are so far down the path to doom that, like, I believe in miracles, for example. I'm holding out for miracle. That's what I'm holding out for. So holding on that things are really, really bad, but also I ain't giving up, because the kids deserve to know that some of us kept trying until the end, if that's where we're going to end up, right? So what I don't like is that that doomerism is being blamed on us, when doomerism is actually because fossil fuel corporations and big banks and governments are still burning fossil fuels. Like, we have to be clear that, like, quit blaming our responses and blame the fossil fuel burning, right? Somebody said, I think I saw it in a movie, apathy only serves the fossil fuel sector. And so, yeah, we have to beware that that's not our fault. Like, you can't blame activists and people who care about the future and people who love their children for the apathy. I mean, we've tried our best, to, undo apathy. But you can't blame us for the doomerism either. I don't know. Yeah. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. But to me, it's action. If you want hope, then take action. Don't ignore what's going on, because that makes you feel better inside. And I got teased for this, but I used to say, yeah, people in North America, they just want to feel good. It's all about feeling good while their children's future is being foreclosed upon. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think we need to take hope and hopelessness out of the conversation and just be hammering home that we need to be taking action.
Thank you, Julie. And those are really wise words. And I absolutely love action leads to hope. I think I'm going to write that down and put it on my desk somewhere. Those are great words to live by. Well, what do you think, Paul? Does action lead to hope?
Yes, I think that's a wonderful saying that I will also post up on my wall. I've always thought, my mom used to always say, we need to always look at the bright side of things. So, what can we look at? What are some of the bright side of things of all of this collapse, climate change collapse of, and one thing is that there's huge growth industries for things like psychiatrists and psychologists and medical system, funeral morticians, huge job opportunities for all of these professions, right, in the near-term future. Basically, what I'm saying is that gallows humor, I think, is very important. Right. I think that the brain, the human brain, if you look at the way it evolved, where, it built up on itself. We had the lizard type fear and flight response, and then it built up to higher and more rational thinking, sort of logical parts of the brain developed. But often, when we feel threatened, when there's an immediate urgent threat, the lion is coming out of the forest, coming out of the grass, leaping at us. We have the more primitive parts of the brain, if you like, that evolved first, take control and suppress the rational part. I personally think that the concept of hope is hardwired into the human brain. I don't think it's just an emotional thing. So and that gets to what Julie was saying, that having hope is part of the human condition. It's part of who we are. We need hope to stay sane. We need hope to stay on an even keel. We need a certain level of hope to take action, because if we don't have a certain level of hope, then we get paralyzed, and we find it very, very difficult to take action. And this is where I think it's very important that people who are in that state, chronically depressed or in severe depression, the best way for them to feel better is actually to start doing something. And it doesn't have to be something solving Maxwell's equations or some physics feat that Einstein did. It can just be like change the cat litter, go outside for a walk and, walk in the forest, talk to a complete stranger and say, hi, how's it going? And so on, like having that human connection. So we're not talking about major actions that can start the whole ball rolling. I mean, there's famous sayings like, to take any journey, you have to do the first step, right? Accomplishing anything of significance, you have to start somewhere. You have to take the first step. Even people that have an absence of hope, if they take the first step, then they can, don't worry about the hope or how you're feeling. Just take the first step, whether it be to get your neighborhood involved in something, get a group of people together to watch a movie on climate or something, or to try to change City Hall's climate action plan. I mean, Ottawa has just released their climate action plan, and the Ontario government has just, or not the Ontario, the federal government has just come out with their climate adaptation plan. Meanwhile, we have wildfires sweeping across Canada right now. The wildfire smoke is affecting many, many people across the entire country. And, I've heard stories of young children in playgrounds in Quebec and Northern Ontario that can't, they don't know why they can't go outside. It's too smoky. It's unhealthy. Why can't we go outside? What's causing this smoke? Well, it's climate change. Well, why are you letting this happen, adults? Right? I mean, I'll have to come back to what Greta says about hope. Just hoping by itself doesn't accomplish something. And I didn't know that Jensen came up with the quote about hopium. I thought that was just a Guy McPherson and Pocolite term, but basically they would use this term in a derogatory fashion for somebody who said we should do, renewables, or we should try to do something about climate change. They would labeled the person and their thoughts and actions as hopium. And I've, had many an argument with them that, hope is part of the human condition. I really think that it's hardwired in us. And if a human doesn't have hope, then they're not really a human. They're more like a zombie, a facsimile of a human. I mean, we all need hope, and we all, we have the ability to which other species don't have. Most of them don't. Some of them do. We're finding out to actually think about the future and to plan about the future and so on. So we need to start doing that to address these huge problems that we have.
Thank you, Paul. And I really like that advice of someone's feeling down to do something. And it's right. You said, something like changing the cat litter. And one of the things that you said, go for a walk in any type of nature. There's been so many scientific studies that have proven that this is highly therapeutic. And of course, most of us have heard of forest bathing. If you haven't, please check it out. But this is very, very healthy for the mind, for the psyche. So yeah, just doing something, just sometimes putting one foot in front of the other. And I want to hear what Dr. Peter Carter has to say about this, because I know that it's very dire, but what are your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, it is indeed dire. I've been, in my Facebook posts and Twitters, I've been pointing this out periodically, and people seem to accept it. However, having been a medical doctor all my life, I know that people never ever give up hope. That just doesn't happen, right? Early on, a lot of years ago, when I sort of started getting involved in climate change science heavily, and I was discussing it with leading climate scientists and also NGOs, I was told the most extraordinary thing. I was told, no, Peter, you mustn't talk about that which could be a climate catastrophe. One thing you mustn't do is talk about those things, because if you do, people will give up hope. They'll become hopeless and depressed, and they won't do a thing. And I was absolutely amazed, because I received this response everywhere I went. So in the end, I sort of gave up on it. But makes me think maybe this did come from the fossil fuel industry. They're up to all kinds of malicious tricks and persuasions to keep us dependent on fossil fuel energy. I should say a quick thing on my upbringing as a child in England. I became aware of the word hope because of my Christian upbringing, right? And so I think it's a very wise passage in the New Testament. And of course, as you know, it talks about the three great virtues: faith, hope, and charity, right? So I was intrigued in this when I started doing climate change. So I looked into the Greek translations, okay? And hope is, in the Greek translation of the New Testament, hope is action. Hope is action. And that explains actually why Mother Teresa, when she was told, you're wonderful, you love these people, and she would interrupt and say, no, you can't just say love, you must say love in action, because the only love there is love in action. So the charity was very much, of course, as we know, the early Christians got popular because they were helping and assisting and treating people who had been left by their society, who were being left in a hopeless situation. So charity translates again as particular action, but action in order to treat and assist those people. Brings me back to finish off with the climate situation. We have always known, that the most vulnerable people to climate change were the people in Africa, and we all come out of Africa. And now, of course, we've seen the results in Africa. Food production is going down. We have tens of millions in an extreme repeated drought in Africa. So I think compassion then is the number one thing. And I remember Julie doing a year-long, every week post. I think it was during the Copenhagen, and she probably did the same thing in Paris. And she did a blog on compassion. And I realized that my involvement in the science, in the numbers, takes me a little bit away from compassion. So it's good to be reminded of those emotions and those virtues.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Peter. Compassion is incredibly important, and it's often left out of the conversation. And I would posit we should have compassion for ourselves and for the pain that we're feeling. And then, of course, broaden that to compassion for others. And one thing I do not want to leave out, one thing that is so important that I feel is so often left out, is compassion for all living beings on this planet, not just our species, but all the other species. And when I hear about people in New York City complaining about the smoke from the Canadian forest fires, and hey, I have too, I also think about all of the living beings that are being burned alive. It's just a horrible thing to contemplate. So there's really a lot for all of us to bring to this discussion, and I'd like to open it up for a lively discussion between all of us.
Thank you, everybody. And this is a difficult topic. But Peter, you mentioned Africa, and it brought to mind a video I saw just a few days ago of 200 people from Africa. I think it's from Nigeria, at one of the big Canadian airports. They all had knapsacks and they were all dressed in yellow. And these people came from Africa to help Canada fight the wildfires in our northern regions. And it just sort of, here they come from a poor country, but they're experts. They're experts in fighting wildfires, and they volunteered to come to Canada to help fight our fires, as did, I think we're getting lots of volunteers from the US. And I think every time one of these clouds of smoke crosses the border, which of course Trump's wall would not have stopped, this smoke. Actually, his wall was going to be on the southern region. So, but basically we're all connected, right? We're all connected. And, this smoke has crossed the oceans to Europe and basically circumventing the planet. So, we're all connected. We need these boreal forests to remain a carbon sink and to, continue to absorb carbon out of the atmosphere. But the way we're going with climate change is just one part of the system that seems to be really breaking. So anyway, it really sort of touched me quite a bit, gave me lots of hope to see these 200 firefighters from Africa coming all the way across the oceans to help us in Canada with the wildfires. Very inspiring.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story, Paul.
And they were dancing. They were dancing in the airport.
They were dancing and singing.
Dancing in the airport. Yeah. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. Yeah. Something that I wanted to share with you folks, because I found it on one of your videos, and that it was the video on eco grief. And one of the commenters talked about realization grief. And what they said was, so I think going through a period of realization grief, in quotation marks, is necessary, but very difficult. But if people are going to continue doing this work, we kind of don't have a choice but to find ways to deal with and overcome this unavoidable, terrible grief. It's something we're all probably going to have to experience if we want to stay engaged with climate change. And by all indications, there's more grief to come. And I think, like, the message that I would want to leave with you folks is that idea that it doesn't matter what we call it, if you need that positive sense that we can make a difference, that we can turn things around, or we can mitigate, etc., whatever we call it, optimism, faith in humanity, hope, call it what you will. One of the things that I believe is that we have to allow ourselves to understand how bad things are, and we have to grieve. And I think it was the climate mobilization called it grieving the future we've lost. Because so many of us, maybe not everybody, but so many of us have dreams and goals and things that we pictured doing when we grew up, and which I never grew up, so I still had dreams and goals. But understanding, and not just that, I mean, compassion comes into it when we think about, the hell that the children are going to have if we don't mitigate drastically, right? When we think about, as Peter mentioned, the people in Africa, I just finished up a climate change curriculum working with people in 4 different African countries. And while we were developing this, the rain bombs, the cyclone that lasted longer than any other cyclone, the drought that people were having to either gather up their cattle, and the government was trucking them to where there was water, or the government was having to bring water to farms, to ranches in Namibia and Botswana. I mean, just in the few months that I worked on this climate change curriculum with these people, you wouldn't believe what was going on in their countries. And people here, we still have people here saying, oh, it's always been hot. It's summer. They don't understand. They're not willing to open up and try to understand what other people are going through. And I just did that thing where I went off on a tangent and forgot what I was trying to tell you folks. We can handle the truth, despite what Jack Nicholson said in whatever movie that was. We can handle the truth, but we have to, I think, lament, grieve, cry, feel all that stuff, and then take action. And then that gives us a sense that, yeah, we have some control. We have some control. I think it's also a gift to the children if we're just doing whatever we can. I mean, bring the cat litter analogy into climate activism, doing whatever we can, right? There's what's the new group? Climate Defiance in the United States. Look them up. Oh my gosh, these young people they're just going to all the, instead of blocking roads, that really upsets people, they're going to where leaders who aren't doing a blessed thing for the future are speaking, and they're shutting them down. And so they're not bothering people who are trying to get to work. They're not bothering people trying to get to their, doctor appointments. They're shutting down people who aren't getting the message. They need to be doing things differently. I want to reach out to people and say, it's okay to cry. Like, this is the saddest thing, right? This is the biggest threat our species has ever experienced. So it's okay to cry. It's okay to lament. And maybe what we need to be doing is doing that together, sharing that grief, because I think sharing that grief will just help uplift people. And maybe that's what we need, is some uplifting. Yeah. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Julie, that's great. I agree that we need uplifting, but I think, to me, my takeaway from what you said, the key word is sharing. Togetherness. We've become so atomized, and we cannot be separate and take this challenge on. We really have to have all hands on deck, no one left behind. That is just something that is so important. And the group that you described, they're doing it. They're being together, and they're doing the important work, and at the same time forging those bonds that will keep them strong as they go forth and do the important work.
And I think Peter brought up a very crucial point about when he started in climate. And, that was the opposition of climate people, anybody in working on climate saying, oh, you can't scare people. You can't tell people the real truth, about what's happening. They'll just shut down. And that's exactly what I experienced. And I just decided one day, I said, look, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to go with what I see, and to hell with the consequences. If I'm scaring people, well, there's a reason. I'm not, there's a difference between bringing people alarming information and alarmism, if you like. And, the whole mainstream science community, all the people at universities, colleagues, highly educated people, they all had this same view and blinders. You can't scare people. You can't tell people what it's really like. And, that's been part of the problem, I think. And now, everything is so in your face. It's not possible for people to act that way anymore. Whereas, say, a decade ago, it was. I mean, most of the mainstream people and reporters, whoever it is, media people, they were very cautious and scared to tell people the truth. So they never did for years and years and years.
I remember Peter was talking to a university group at a small conference, and he was telling them the truth about the climate emergency. And quietly, the afternoon speaker had come in and was standing at the back. And when it was Q&A time, this afternoon speaker, who was one of Canada's preeminent climate scientists, called Peter on this, and he said something like, I don't think that you should be telling young people how bad it is. And Peter, it was a sight it was beautiful. It was a beautiful thing. He said, I'm a doctor, and it would be irresponsible for me to not tell my patient the truth about their diagnosis, even if it's a terminal diagnosis. These young people deserve to know the state of their planet. And if it makes them sad, then maybe they will wake up and take action. We asked a politician once, what would it take for the Canadian government, for all of the members of parliament to do something, not just around the edges, but to actually take drastic action. He said 300,000 people on Parliament Hill. 300,000 people. Well, nowadays I'm like, oh my gosh, that would take a lot of people burning a lot of fossil fuels to get there, right? But I'm trying to figure out what it's going to take to not burn fossil fuels, but to let our politicians know, like, we need to build political will here, folks. That's an action, right? Talking to our elected officials is action. That's action. Take action, folks.
I just want to share something we're all very much aware of. There have been many, many, many great, wonderful human beings, and they still are involved in this struggle, this fight for a safe climate for our children or future generations. I first came across that sort of terminology in 2006 with the UK Stern Commission report. And very frequently, he would make the statement, well, we're doing this for all future generations, right? Pretty amazing statement coming from an ex-World Bank leader. Together, we have made absolutely tremendous progress. The future looks dire, but it's been looking dire for many, many, many years. The climate emergency has been acknowledged. Most of the lies and subterfuges of the fossil fuel industry have been thoroughly exposed, and everybody is aware of that. And we have to carry on, don't we? Because it's our absolute personal, individual, sacred duty to do everything we can for today's children. So I think if somebody sort of was losing motivation or hopelessness, I would say to them, well, just look around at the children and think about their future. And then I think you'll get the message.
Thank you, Peter. I can't think of a better point to end on, and that is the future, the very future of our species, and every living being cares for its young. We are called to do so as well, and especially in regards to their ability to live on this planet. As Julie said, doing something is doing something, whether you're speaking to your congressperson, you're writing a letter to the editor, or whether you're leaving a comment on one of our videos. That's very, very helpful for the other people who are commenting. And it's also very helpful for the analytics for our channel. And it matters to us. And the fact that we've provoked thought in you matters as well. So please like, share, and subscribe. And we very much look forward to seeing you again at the next Climate Emergency Forum.